Okay, so let's get going to look at this essay by Rebekah Cron, writing about cryonics. So, title of the essay is Cryonics and Ethical Means of Life Extension. It was written in 2014 by Rebekah Cron, who is studying at the University of Exeter. This is her dissertation. And so first off, what is cryonics? So oftentimes people think that cryonics is freezing. So that's like the everyday understanding of it, but it's technically not freezing. So it has to do with the cryonic preservation of humans. And so cryonic is basically the scientific study or process of cooling things at very low temperatures, technically understood as cryosuspension. So Cron's essay focuses on the company named Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which is based in Scottsdale, Arizona. So if you want to freeze yourself, you'll have to pay anywhere from $70,000 to $200,000, okay? And so a good part of the motivation behind cryonics rests on the idea that we might be losing out on the possibility of suspending life after death. So we might be losing out on the possibility of life after death. I shouldn't say the possibility of suspending life after death. We're losing out on the possibility of life after death instead of opting for the decision to cremate the body. In other words, when we cremate a body, we're opting out of the decision to have a potential life that is quote unquote available for someone who opts for cryonic preservation. Okay, so after death, we could be foregoing the possibility of life extension if we just cremate ourselves or bury our bodies, right? So not only is the possibility of life extension, is there a possibility of life extension, but there's also the very real possibility that we could find a cure for the original disease that the person died of, right? So that's also a possibility that people are thinking of, but it's just that, a possibility, right? So then, in other words, cryonics is another means of saving future lives is the idea. So then, ideally, the cryonic process should start within 2 to 15 minutes after the heart stops. And of course, arrangements have to be coordinated with the hospice or the hospital with Alcor ahead of time to start the process right away. So the steps of the cryonic process have to do with first, within 2 to 15 minutes, freezing the body after the person dies, that is. Freezing the body in an ice bath, not freezing the body, putting the body in an ice bath. Then an anesthetic is administered to protect the brain. Then 3, the blood is circulated out of the body and replaced with a so-called antifreeze, which enables proper preservation. So again, it's not freezing, it's really a fluid that is replaces the blood so as to avoid any damage that the immersion in the liquid nitrogen will present. So then vital organs are simultaneously monitored to prevent damage. 4, the body is then submerged in liquid nitrogen starting at 125 degrees till the temperature decreases to somewhere around negative, did I just say, I should have said negative 125 degrees, till the temperature decreases to a mean of negative 196 degrees, right? So, which happens in about 2 weeks. And we should know that the patient has the option of cryonically suspending just their head or their entire body. In other words, you could preserve your head, maybe if you want to save money, or you could preserve your whole body, okay? So most importantly, keep in mind that no one has been revived from the cryonic suspension as of yet. Other animals like dogs and pigs have been revived, but not humans. So this means that people who are being cryonically suspended do so only on the hope or the possibility that the technology will improve the chances of healthy reanimation, not to mention the hope for a cure of disease that killed the person to begin with. So with this, we'll add that cryonics is also not a means of immortality either. That oftentimes people think this is some kind of promise of immortality. It's not. So even if you're reanimated, which there is a possibility that you won't be, that you're reanimated, you still will have to die after you're reanimated sometime after that, right? It doesn't promise any kind of immortality. And then likewise, there's not necessarily a promise that you'll be cured of the disease. There's not a promise that there'll be a disease for cancer. So in other words, these people are really just going on the hope that technology will be advanced past the present state of technology to be something that will be sophisticated enough to not only revive people, but possibly cure the illness that they died of, right? So, in other words, what are the ethical issues, right? So, a couple of ethical issues to consider. One is that we could start. Well, one of the ways that we could start thinking of the ethical issues would be referring to these authors, Beauchamp and Childress, who are a couple of philosophers who came up with these four well-known principles of biomedical research, so that when you're working on biomedical research, you could apply these principles to it to understand whether or not your procedures are ethical. So 1 is the respect for autonomy, 2 is non-malfeasance, 3 is beneficence, and 4 is justice. So Cron is citing an author who referred to these 4 principles, whereby, and this guy is named Tandy. So in other words, Tandy comes to the conclusion that for cryonics, biomedical professionals have a strong and actual obligation to help ensure cryonic hibernation of their cryonic patients. So, in other words, for Tandy, cryonic hibernation is better than traditional death and should be made available to anyone who could afford it, okay? So one issue to highlight here is the basic question of expense. So does it make sense to allocate dollars to help those who could afford such cryonic hibernation on a gamble, right? Instead of allocating the resources to other immediate life-saving charities such as help with malaria, maybe even nowadays with contributing money to research on COVID, etc. So these methods would be, according to Cron, more cost-effective and cheaper way and would reach more people as opposed to the egoistic concerns of cryonic preservation. So I'm having you skip subchapter number 2, the definition of death, and then preceding with subchapter number 3. So ownership, so the title is Ownership, Bodies as Anatomical Gifts of Research. So this is a point that is brought in line with some of the state laws in Arizona, whereby Alcor has a clause in their agreement whereby you have to actually donate your body as an anatomical gift of research in order to be cryonically hibernated in their what are basically these large aluminum tubes. They look like tall thermoses, basically. So, in other words, once Alcor is able to, if they can, reanimate you, then you are given back legal custody for your body. So we could see how there's possible ethical concerns there, in the sense that we don't have any guarantee that that Alcor will actually revive you in the way that you might be planning. So she brings up a case whereby if, let's say, you and your family decide on being cryonically preserved together, and let's say that upon reanimation, only you get reanimated and the rest of your family do not. Question is, will you then have free use of your body, or will you be a medical anomaly that is subject to research in a way that you might not want to, or you could also be kept as some kind of special research patient against your will, right? So in other words, Alcor's good ethics now have the very real possibility that could shift into the future, whereby they have unethical means of dealing with the bodies after you're reanimated, right? So their ethics might shift, experimentation, etc., might be something that they're interested in terms of your reanimation as the anomaly, as the person who was revived, right, hundreds of years later. So then I'm having you look at the subchapter 4, cryonics, suicide, and euthanasia. So if euthanasia is considered a good death, it could present ethical problems in terms of suicide, whereby people who are considering cryonics would elect to die before the illnesses such as dementia actually take hold, along with other genetic predispositions that might get them to consider cryonics before the body deteriorates with the disease. And then that way, sometime in the future, if you could be revived, you would then not have to deal with the problematic disease that you originally died of, right? And so we could see that there's problems of suicide there. So euthanasia then becomes a type of insurance policy, provided the reanimation goes hand in hand with a possible cure for the ailment you died of, right? Because there's no guarantee of any of that. So also, given that preservation needs to be timely within minutes, there's a very real possibility that Alcor could kill you in order to preserve you. And there's actually cases whereby this has happened, whereby Alcor was charged in a case where they thought that the person was preserved too soon. Then I have you looking at the subchapter titled Alienation from Friends and Family. So this presents other ethical anomaly whereby, for example, a patient might want to conceal his cryonic preservation plans from his family due to the egoistic message cryonic preservation implies. In other words, I wish to live into and spend a fortune on the gamble that I'll live into the future without my family, right? That's a very real possibility. You could be looking for an alternative life this way, right? In other words, the grass looks greener on the other side of cryonic hibernation. And this might be a very real possibility for people to become cryonically preserved. Then I have you looking at 6, alienation from society, the problem of identity in cryonic revival. So for Cron and for us, alienation from society is a very real possibility. Consider the fact that people that are living now who say who are in their 80s or 90s already experience technical alienation and cultural alienation. Never mind that cryonically suspended patient might not be revived for hundreds of years from now. So imagine the alienating disconnect that reanimation would present. What kind of experience would that be hundreds of years from now if you're revived and you don't really understand the culture, you don't understand the technology, what kind of learning curve would that be? And what kind of ethical problems then present, right? So again, there's no guarantee that you'll be in tip-top health once revived, or as mentioned earlier, that there'll be a cure for whatever ailment or disease that that took your life to begin with. Okay, so I think that gives us just a little preview of how to understand some of the ethical problems with cryonics and cryonic hibernation. So we'll take it from there. Thanks, class. Bye-bye.